Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining this week's Next Normal series from Worth Live on the future of healthcare tech. Firstly, I hope you and your loved ones are keeping well during what continues to be a challenging time for so many of us. I'm Juliet, Scott-Croxford, CEO of Worth Media and your moderator for the next hour, and I'm delighted to be joined by special guest Noor, Sweid, founder and general partner at Global Ventures, Mary Oseid, Senior Vice President and Regional Operations and Strategy at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Centre, and Kathleen, Entwistle, Private Wealth Advisor at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Juliet.
Hi. So before we kick off, our intention at Worth is to create conversations that help inspire and inform our community, many of whom are investors, founders, or private business owners, and who also have a keen interest in topics such as healthcare, wellness, technology, and innovation, with a focus on how we create a more inclusive and equal economy and society for the benefit of everyone. So we hope you find this conversation useful. Forward thinking is the essence of this series, The Next Normal, where Worth is looking ahead to what the world looks like after the current crisis passes, and how specific businesses and sectors are not only responding to the existing challenges, but also what they're doing to transform themselves and to pivot and to prepare for the future. This week's session is focused on how healthcare technology is leading us into the future. It's an industry that's been impacted in a significant way by the pandemic, and in this, innovations in healthcare technology have accelerated, and emerging markets are also influencing the future of healthcare tech in a big way. So we're delighted to have investor, founder and general partner at Global Ventures, Noor, Sweid, and expert Mary Oseid from Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Centre with us today to share their perspectives on why healthcare tech is the way forward. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. We really do welcome questions from the audience. Don't be shy. Attendees are muted on entry into this webinar series, but you can use your chat function at the bottom of the screen, and feel free to type in any comments or questions into that, or directly to me, Juliet, Scott-Croxford. I can either unmute you and you can ask the questions directly to the speakers, or if you prefer to stay anonymous, that's totally fine, and we'll weave it into the conversation as we go. So let's kick off. Firstly, a personal check-in with you all. Noor, you're based in Dubai. What's it been like over there during this time, and how have you been managing your own wellness and well-being during these challenging times?
So hi everyone, thank you for joining us, first of all. I think Dubai is a very unique place. It went into kind of lockdown, if you will, quite early. And you know, the kids were home from school from the beginning of March. So they've been home now twice as long as their summer holidays, which is something I keep reminding myself. And then, you know, it was very much, you can't go out, you can't do anything. It was very strict. And that was done very early. So that served us really well, because now the city and the country is opening up. It's really under control. And we can go back to restaurants, go back to the beach, enjoy life as we knew it pre-COVID without worrying too much. So that's very positive. And then in terms of how I've been managing, it's, you know, I think one day at a time, a lot of yoga and a lot of breathing.
Sounds very similar. And Mary, how are you doing personally, and just share a bit about your experience over the past few months?
Sure, thanks for asking, Juliet. Things are good up here. I'm in northern New England in the United States, and so it's very rural. And we really haven't seen much of a surge in terms of COVID, despite a lot of planning and preparation on our part here at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health. And so it's been kind of quiet, and I think the thing that has been the biggest challenge for me, being a healthcare professional, is learning to work from home. That was new to me, and it's been a challenge. And some days I enjoy it, some days it feels like I'm being punished. So it's nice to be in the office today, chatting with all of you. You know, there's nothing better than a long walk to clear my head and kind of get things back on track when it's feeling a little bit stressful with everything that's going on.
And I think we've got quite a global audience today, so welcome everyone to this discussion on the future of healthcare tech. Before we get going, Noor, I'd love to, Noor and Mary, I'd love to hear sort of a brief sort of summary about your background. I'd prefer not to read out your bios. I think you do a much better job at sharing your journey into the healthcare tech industry. And Noor, you've had an incredible career. How did you get started?
So I got started in Boston 20 years ago working as a consultant in biotech and pharma. So very close to, healthcare tech, which is what we're focusing on now. And that was the early 2000s. And then my MBA, moved back to Dubai with Booz Allen, ended up joining family business and scaling and IPOing that at the same time as starting the first yoga studio in Dubai, which became a large wellness chain, which I ultimately sold to a private equity firm. And in that journey, realized it was much harder to run a startup than to run a billion-dollar company in many ways. And so really became involved in the startup ecosystem, working with founders and venture capital, and focusing on areas where I think we can create impact and do well and do good at the same time.
Amazing. And Noor, you were also the only Arab woman in the Middle East running a VC fund and the first woman to lead an IPO in that region, correct?
Correct. So it's interesting. I try not to remember that too often. So I think it's a journey. I think it's one of these things where, as long as you're doing something you believe in and something you care about with a little bit of luck on your side, that becomes irrelevant. I started my career when consulting was, largely male. I went to business school when it's less than 30% female. So I just think it's something that if you've grown up with it, you don't see it, and you just do your best at things that are important to you. And if that means you're the first, you're the first. If that means you're the only one, you're the only one. And those are byproducts.
And Mary, share a bit about your journey and background, and specifically how you got more involved in the telehealth space.
Sure. Yeah, I've been a healthcare administrator for quite some time now. I've dropped the years. It's just not necessary anymore. But I've been in operations and healthcare finance for many years, working in health systems and as a consultant. And about 5 years ago, got involved in the work of telehealth at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health because they were really looking for some strength in operations to back up the technology. After all, the technology is important and helpful, but we needed some expertise thinking about how do you roll it out, how do you engage patients, how do you engage providers in telehealth. And so that's how I got into it, and have been leading the charge here at Dartmouth-Hitchcock since.
So let's talk about navigating the pandemic. Obviously, healthcare has been one of the industries most prolifically impacted by COVID-19, leading to a telehealth boom and some big innovations. What were some of the early challenges at the start of the pandemic, especially in the healthcare tech space? And Mary, how did you navigate those at Dartmouth-Hitchcock?
Yeah, well, the great thing about the coming out of the pandemic was, at least here in the United States, was the emergency orders that came out both at the national level and at the state level here. And that really opened up the opportunity for us to think differently about how we were going to be reaching patients through telehealth. It allowed us to change the way we license providers from state to state. It changed the payment mechanisms, and all of those things allowed us to move quickly. And the privacy, some of the privacy regulations were lifted as well. So it allowed us to move quickly with our outpatient virtual visits, seeing a doctor. We could now do it quickly through telehealth. And so we went from hosting a handful of telehealth visits with providers, doctors, every day to hosting over 2,000 a day. So really, really fast. And we made that jump in about a week once the changes were made once the changes were made at the national and state level. So significant changes there. I would say the technology is still a challenge though. It is still a little bit clunky for patients I think not only at our organization but around the country to download software and all those kinds of things to really connect with their provider. So still working to perfect the technology.
And we're going to do a quick poll to see of the audience if anyone's taken advantage of telehealth while in quarantine. I know in the UK as well, it led to a big boom. Noor, in your field, how has the pandemic sort of impacted the work that you've been doing?
So in venture capital at large, I think we've seen an acceleration of certain industries. One of them being healthcare and health tech adoption. In our part of the world, in emerging markets, we struggle with healthcare. So we have in the region 1.2 doctors per 1,000 people. The US and Europe sit at about 3.7 and 3.9. So when you think about the number of doctors and then the number of hospital beds is a similar multifold lower. So when we think about that, we think that we're never going to solve healthcare access by building more hospitals and graduating more doctors, just like we didn't solve financial inclusion by building more banks. The question becomes, how do you solve it digitally? So we solve financial inclusion by digital means, and we'll solve healthcare access by digital means. So the question then becomes, where is telehealth? What are the digital health solutions that exist in emerging markets right now? And why are they still so young and not yet adopted? So when you think about venture capital and you think about investing in a risk return level, venture capital in emerging markets is really shy to invest in over-regulated industries, namely healthcare at this point. So 6 months ago, your regulator was not happy for you to adopt digital health. Your insurance company did not want to pay for it, and your patient did not want to use it. I think what COVID has done is really accelerated these 3 points. And now we reach a point where the regulator wants digital health to exist, the insurance company wants to pay for it because it's a lot cheaper, and the patient wants to use it. And so suddenly it's all eyes on digital health, and yet these fledgling companies are still so young. And the question is, how do you fund them so that they can grow quickly enough and meet the demand that this pandemic's created? So, healthcare being one vertical that was impacted, others, education, agriculture. So we've seen several verticals that have historically been kind of shied away from when it comes to venture capital funding that suddenly VCs are very excited about. And it's largely due to what's happened in the world over the last few months.
And has I'm guessing, but I don't know, in terms of the technology that was used through the pandemic, how has that kind of led to improving the technology? Given the sort of the user rates, Mary, I think you shared some data with me yesterday about the number of people that were using telehealth pre and post pandemic. How has that then fed back to improving the technology and improving the experience for the people using it?
Yeah, so as I said, we started with just a handful of telehealth visits a day, and are now during the height of the pandemic, we're doing about 2,000, and unfortunately, it's dropping back down to about 1,000 visits a day, telehealth visits a day. And I think that what Noor said is important, is that patients really haven't been super excited about it in the past. And I think we're starting to see that pendulum is swinging back, and patients are saying, I'm happy to come in, at least in the United States. It's easy and I can come in. And I think what we're seeing coming out of that pushback from patients is that they want technology that's easier, really easy for them to access, feels a lot like just having a FaceTime call or even doing a phone call with a provider. And so that's what we're seeing. Our expectation of our technology providers as healthcare providers is that they're going to provide something for us that is very simple and easy for our patients to use.
And what about the sort of patterns in demographics using it, and the impact of rural communities, which presumably this technology can only be a good thing to get healthcare to rural communities that don't readily have access to normal medical care?
Yes, absolutely. We struggle with that certainly here in northern New England. We are probably the most rural academic medical center in the United States. And so we use telehealth not only, as we've been talking about it here, for a provider to see a patient, primary care, specialty care, seeing patients in their homes. But we also use it to connect providers with providers. So specialists here at the Academic Medical Center providing support and solutions to hospitalists and primary care providers in rural locations. So we think this is a real opportunity for us to think about how we can support those rural hospitals going forward. The pandemic has really been a struggle in rural America. These hospitals were struggling before the pandemic, the financial pressure that this has put on them. It's likely that we'll lose some of those hospitals, and the opportunity for us to be connecting with patients in their home, caring for them in their home will be critical if we see any of these rural hospitals go out of business in the next few months.
And I just saw a few more people join, so I just wanted to say welcome to everyone. We're discussing in this next normal session the future of healthcare tech, and we're joined by Noor Sweid, founder and general partner at Global Ventures, and Mary Oseid at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center, and also I think Kathy Entwistle from Morgan Stanley. Hi, Kathy. Kathy, can you hear us? Okay, we'll come to Kathy shortly. Noor, as a VC, how did you pivot to making health tech a priority during this time? I think you said that it was sort of one of several vertical priorities that you had. What changes did you sort of have to make within your firm to shift focus on the healthcare space?
So very little changes. It was more serendipity than anything else. We had made our first health tech investment in March, and it was a company we had started doing diligence on in January in Nigeria. It's a company called Helium Health, and it's an EMR, an electronic medical record system for hospitals, as well as regulators, as well as the patient side. So the patient, when they leave the hospital, can see which doctor they saw, what the doctor said, and what they may have prescribed, with the ability then to apply for a financial loan if you can't afford that treatment, all within the platform. So it's an A to Z solution, and it's instrumental in areas like Africa because less than 30% of hospital visits in Africa are documented. So to create this sort of solution that works online and offline in a part of the world that desperately needs it, and you're talking about 1 billion people, is great. And we had some amazing investors alongside us, like Tencent and AIC. So it was a really global consortium. So we happened to lead that deal at the same time as healthcare and health tech is gaining momentum. And so when that came and that was announced, it became very clear to us that there was actually a lot of demand for health tech companies to be funded and grown. And we were also in the middle of diligencing another company called Proximi, which is an augmented reality platform for surgeons. And so through Proximi and that, collaboration for surgeons remotely, and even more so now because of COVID, and we had started that diligence a few months ago as well. So we had moved our focus to health tech as an area that was underserved in venture, and that I had some expertise and some of the other team members have expertise as well. We had done our fair share of fintech and food tech and the rest, and had suddenly, done this at the right time. And what that meant was we became inundated with a pipeline of companies that were looking for funding in our part of the world in this space. And it was something that we said, okay, let's lean into this because you can do a lot of good for the world as well as doing very well financially. Absolutely.
And you've compared this pandemic to the acceleration of healthcare tech during this pandemic to the global financial crisis, the 2008 crisis, acceleration of fintech. How quickly did you see some of those similarities come to light?
Pretty quickly. And I think it was, we took a step back and we said, how much of this healthcare inclusion issue is anecdotal and how much can we quantify? What's the data around it? Because everybody in emerging markets knows the numbers around financial inclusion 5 years ago and now. So it's 85% on banks. It's, if you work in emerging markets, these are things that the whole emerging market tech ecosystem has been tackling and investing and grappling with. And, you know, we can tell you 2 billion people over the last 3 years have been included in the financial ecosystem. So it's just something where, so when healthcare came up, I said, well, what's the data? And so suddenly you started to see how many people don't have access even to a primary care doctor, how many people travel more than 6 hours to a hospital, how many. And so once you started to see that data, we're like, wait, we've seen this movie before, where it's literally about access, physical. It doesn't make sense for hospitals, just like it doesn't make sense for banks, to serve the middle and bottom part of the pyramid. It's not sustainable financially, and so on and so forth. So therefore, they need to be served in a different way. And this is a need, it's not a desire. And so it didn't take us long to kind of draw out those similarities and say, similarly, the VCs will invest, and then so will the industry and ultimately the governments, to ensure that everybody has access to a doctor if they need one.
And what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in healthcare tech literally over the last sort of 4 to 5 months based on what we've gone through?
So there's two parts, you know, as I see it, and one that Mary alluded to, which is kind of the numbers on telehealth. So one of the companies we really like, you know, in Egypt, used to have 200 teleconsultations a day. That was 3 months ago. Now they have 15,000 a day. And the number keeps going up, and not all of it's COVID related, but suddenly the awareness and the willingness to use these technologies. So one of the biggest things is the willingness to use these technologies.
Does, I just want to talk about user adoption a bit, Mary. I mean, I think you sort of described it as a pendulum swing, and it was almost obviously it was out of necessity to be using this technology. How much is that pendulum swinging back the other way, or how much of that adoption is actually sticking, do you think?
Yeah, so we're seeing, we went up to about 2,000 visits a day from almost none. And we've probably lost half of those as the pendulum is swinging back. And I think that the pandemic really provided us with the opportunity, right? Everyone was worried, and they needed to see their providers either with a COVID issue or with other chronic issues that they're managing. And so patients were really willing, providers were really willing to provide the telehealth visit during the pandemic. As we come out of it here, again in Northern New England, and generally we're seeing this across the United States, patients are saying, you know what, I'll come in. I think there's several things at play here. We have developed an infrastructure, at least here in the United States, where we help people get to their doctor's appointments. It's easy to get to a physician's office to see a patient, at least for a lot of people who live close to their facilities. In these rural regions, it's a little bit more difficult. But the other thing is that, as we've seen in other industries, we have 3 challenges in front of us. We need to make telehealth, digital health, or these outpatient virtual visits, we need to make them faster, we need to make them easier, and it needs to be cheaper, and we need to provide better access. So if we're just offering a patient a telehealth visit, which looks exactly like the in-person visit that you were doing 6 months ago, the only difference is you're on video, that really isn't going to move us into the digital age in healthcare. And so our challenge is to come back now and really improve telehealth in a way that it's faster, easier, and provides better access to patients, if we're going to swing that pendulum back and maintain those 2,000 and maybe even push it to 3,000 or 4,000 visits a day.
There's a few questions from the audience. We did a quick poll at the start, and I think there was sort of 59% of the audience had taken advantage of telehealth while in quarantine. Now, I think a lot of us are in urban areas as well, but I just thought that was quite interesting of this group. I want to go to questions now. There's one from Jack Bestable. I think you had a question around the role that wearables play in tech, Jack, and also another question. Jack, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
What's your question, Jack?
Well, specifically, what specialists are you finding that are most resistant, I guess, to the concept of telehealth from a specialist perspective?
Jack, that wasn't very clear. I think it was correct me, but I think the question is, what role are wearables playing in the health
Oh,
tech?
yeah, okay, yeah. No, that too. I actually asked a couple of questions. So, yeah, specifically the increasing, use of wearables. What role do you see that? Does that facilitate the quality of the telehealth experience, I guess?
Who wants to take that? Mary, do you want to go
I'm
first?
happy to chat about that a bit. We're very focused right now coming out of COVID on these outpatient virtual visits. But as we move, as we become a digital industry, fingers crossed, that will happen for us in the next, it's going to be several years yet before we're there. But this concept of wearables and tracking your own personal data is going to be a significant part of healthcare in the future, I believe. We as patients, whether you have chronic illness or you're focused on your own wellness, need to be tracking and recording your own data, sharing it with your providers, and working together to understand that data to keep you healthy, keep you out of the hospital, keep you out of the doctor's office. So we think both from a wellness perspective and a chronic illness perspective, the ability to track your own personal data and share it with your provider will be critical as we continue to evolve our healthcare system.
Thanks, Mary. And I think Jack's other question was related to specialist areas. And are there specialist areas that are more resistant than others to using this technology and the telehealth technology?
Certainly what we're seeing at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, and I think we see a bit across the country here, is that primary care is an area that seems to be more open to telehealth and outpatient virtual visits, and seeing their patients through a video connection. I think we see that surgeons are a little bit more reluctant, of course. Certainly a lot of what they do is very hands-on, both before, during the surgery, and then after. So we're trying to design models that really engage our surgeons in telehealth, because that's a little bit of a challenge. And then there's significant opportunity for those medical specialists who are managing those chronically ill patients, whether they have hypertension or they have diabetes or they have some major GI issue like Crohn's disease. There's a lot of use with those medical specialties really wanting to, this relates back to the wearables, wanting to track their chronically ill patients, track their data, their information, get it regularly, and be interacting with their patients more regularly to try to keep them out of the hospital and keep them from getting sick. So I think that sort of those three buckets are the ones we have: primary care, medical specialties, and surgical. Primary care far along, medical specialties moving in that direction with the help of data that they're getting from their patients and trying to help surgeons get there.
Thanks, Mary. I want to go to another question. Abdul Nassani has a question, and Noor, we've seen a huge explosion, obviously, in the investment space in this industry. Abdul, I think you've got a specific question around the movement on investment in the wellness space. Are you there, Abdul?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I have a question for Noor. I want, since she is holding an investment company, I want to ask her: is her investor interested in investing in wellness ventures more than medical? Is there a movement in the investment of wellness sector, which is a pre-medical, less complicated than the medical sector?
And Noor, I know you've previously sort of been involved heavily in the wellness space, but I guess, yeah, I guess, are you seeing trends towards wellness as well as obviously in the healthcare tech space?
So I think we are, and I'm sorry, I couldn't hear Abdul very well, but I'll talk a little bit about prevention and wellness and repeat the question if I don't answer it. So for us, what we're seeing is a lot of adoption in teleconsultation and telehealth, but then we're also seeing a lot of new companies come up in the prevention space. And so it's really about, monitoring, as what Mary said, different kind of attributes of your own health, and then monitoring your intake of different food, all the way through monitoring kind of the exercise and having that be, the remote training and what kind of training and the different heart rates and heartbeats. And so getting all that information into your wearables is key. What we're also seeing is some really interesting business models around involving insurance companies and corporates. So a lot of corporates, for example, have budgets, $800, $1,000 for wellness for their employees every year. And those typically don't get used properly. So now there's these platforms where that goes into a platform that the employees can use, and they can choose how to use that, and the insurance company then monitors that, and the premiums come down. So now that we're seeing a lot of payers go into the whole, how do we keep people well? We'll start to see a lot more technology platforms go into monitoring that, so you can prove it to the payer and reduce premiums. So that's where the whole wellness space and prevention space is going largely. And that couples a lot with mental health as well. So we're seeing a lot of new technology come out on mental health and mental wellness. So not just, remote therapy, but a lot more around your mood check every day. So many platforms, how are you feeling today? What are you worried about today? So it's really becoming a full technology experience. And how we define it is really the patient journey. So when someone is sick, how do you go from being a sick patient to a well person? The first thing you do is look for content. And then if your content provider can also help you book a doctor or a teleconsult, you'll just do that naturally on that same platform. Once you see your doctor, if you can keep your medical records in that same platform, and then get your pharmaceuticals or whatever you might need on the same platform, right? So what patients really want is one platform, one place they go for all of their medical needs across the journey until they feel well again, rather than having to continue to switch different companies, especially for chronic conditions, as Mary said. I mean, that's where we've seen the highest adoption is chronic conditions for teleconsultation as well as digital pharmaceuticals. So if you have a chronic condition, every month you need these certain meds. Why would you have to go to your doctor and get a prescription filled again? So that's where we're seeing kind of wellness and prevention come in. So I don't know if that answered Abdul's question, because it was very, very distant, but I hope it did. If it didn't, please tell me what the question is and I'll answer it more directly.
Actually, we have been working for the last 1.5 years on a new innovation. And we didn't expect that some of the people that's working with me on the project, they explained for me that this is going to be explosive in this pandemic. Can you hear me? I don't know if.
Yeah.
Yes. So some of the people are telling me that it's going to be. So now we are in the patent stage to complete the patent. Hopefully, in a couple of months, we will finish the patent stage. And I wanted to see if I want to take this new innovation to a global stage and discuss with the investment companies. That's are they interested to take this kind of products into global stage? That's helps different physical and mental wellness in the same time. This new innovation and equipment that we are building.
Thanks. Thanks, Abdul. So Noor, just to build on that, how do you sort of structure your portfolio and identify the new technologies and new companies and founders that you want to support? What's the sort of approach in that?
I'm assuming it's in general at large, not just for health tech.
Yeah.
So we invest in Series A and B companies, usually have at least $1 or $2 million in revenue on an annual basis, and they're looking to scale. So the question becomes, how do you go from 2 million to 20 million in a short period of time? And the reason we focus in that area is because we believe that's where we can add the most value, given our backgrounds as a firm. We invest in regional companies across the Middle East and Africa, and we find that founders here typically, do need a lot more knowledge transfer and a lot more. There's a higher scarcity of capital for them. So those are the founders we typically work with. The way we think about portfolio construction is really across Series A and Series B, across different types of founders. We like the B2B business space more than the B2C space. So we really focus on enterprise tech. So even when we think about healthcare tech, we like business models where we can actually help affect revenues because we can help them find clients rather than it's pure consumer. And so we work a lot with the providers rather than just the patients, for example. So that's how we think about portfolio construction. We think about, structuring exits across many years. So when we invest in companies, we like to think about, when will we likely get this company to scale to where the founder wants to be, and then therefore structure the exit, and those need to be staggered.
I would like to shift focus now to future, and do let us know if you've got other questions. Please type it in the chat and we can weave it in. But Noor, you're incredibly passionate about healthcare inclusion, and how do the companies that you choose to fund help move us to a future where everyone has access to healthcare?
Well, so, I'll go back to the example of Helium Health, where if you can't afford the treatment, you can immediately apply using the platform for financial aid and get your treatment. So, everybody wins in that case. The insurance company is much happier. And if there's no insurance companies, the patient's much happier because you'd rather treat someone now than in a month when their flu has become pneumonia, right? So everybody wins. They're more productive members of society. They're better in their family. They're better in general. Large insurance companies pay less, governments have less opportunity costs, and so on. So that provides access to people who might not be able to afford it. And then we have other companies in the region like Untitled, which has 16 million active unique users a month for Arabic health content, right? And then that content becomes, do you want to book a doctor? So by funding these sorts of companies, you have suddenly a whole world. There's 440 million people in the Middle East or North Africa that speak a language. You do want to provide content about their health and their well-being and their wellness in their language, and then the ability to immediately convert that into booking a doctor or a teleconsultation. And then you have countries like Rwanda, where the government woke up one day and said, every citizen should have access to a doctor, right? And using their mobile, not necessarily in person, right? So again, then helping them fund that desire. Other companies we've seen like remote radiology. So a lot of countries have been gifted X-ray machines and other radiology machines, but there's nobody to read these scans. And so these sit idle in some villages. Well, if you can build a remote radiology platform on low bandwidth, because internet is not what it is in the US and these countries. So really emerging market solutions for these emerging market problems. And then you can actually read these scans and help these patients a lot more than once every month a radiologist comes into town. So that's what we call healthcare inclusion. It's not rocket science. It's not biotech. We're not going to go cure cancer. We literally just want people to have access to a doctor when they need one.
And Mary, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'd just love to add, I think that, there's a few things that I heard Noor say that are critical here in the United States as well. And one is affordability, right? We need telehealth to drive down the cost of care so that patients can access it. It's expensive today to get care. Even if you're insured, it's still expensive. So we've got to drive down the cost. We've got to make it easier, right? We can't have patients driving 6-7 hours to get care, not being close to family. So really driving down, making it easy for patients to get this care. And we think digital is the way to go. And we think that they're going to be accessing care differently. There's going to be things like AI. There are things like AI assisted, chat bots that can provide you with a lot of information about your own healthcare. So we think that's really critical as we move forward as well. And then finally, we just have to improve access, especially here in the United States. We have to make it easier for patients to get the care that they need when they want it. And so we think if we can do those things, and we think telehealth is really the way to do those things, offering people care in their homes, in their communities, so they don't need to travel, and it really takes down the cost of care for them.
And Mary, what's the role of the insurance companies here? I mean, the US is unique in a lot of ways when it comes to healthcare. Are you seeing the telehealth technology drive down the cost, or are we not?
Yeah, I think that's been really one of the biggest issues here in the United States is that both the federal government and the insurers have not seen significant reductions in costs related to telehealth. And I think it's because telehealth, the way we think about telehealth and the way we talk about it is these outpatient virtual visits. But I think the way that real difference is really with the full-on digital health experience for patients, that they're doing a lot of their own self-care, that we're using digital strategies to drive down the cost of care in hospitals, and we continue to use some of these, we continue to use the outpatient virtual visits as a way to engage patients and keep them engaged in their care. So I think that that's what we need to prove. And I think right now we have the opportunity to show both the insurers and, as you know, in the United States, one of the biggest insurers is the federal government, that telehealth is a strategy for driving down the cost of care. And we've seen that in other industries, right? The only way you're successful with the digital transformation is if you make some major changes, and one of them is driving down the cost.
I'd love to hear your unique perspectives on what you think the future of healthcare will look like in 5 and 10 years' time. Mary?
Sure. Well, you know, I of course think about this all the time. What are we preparing for? What do we need to be prepared for? And I think coming out of COVID, initially, there are going to be some minor changes, but I don't think we're going to see a big transformation right out of the gate. I think patients are, and everybody's going to kind of drift back to where they were pre-COVID. I think we'll see some changes in the way that healthcare is paid for. I think we'll have better payment for telehealth. I think that we will have some patients and some providers that are really interested in outpatient virtual visits, but I think that we'll sort of drift back. In the next 5 to 10 years, I really do think that we're going to see kind of this digital transformation, if you will. As I was talking about, the fact that we are going to have tools that can help patients with self-care, whether it's wearables or whether it's these AI-directed chatbots that provide them with information that they can get anytime, anywhere about their own care. It's making outpatient care cheaper and easier and accessible remotely. In the hospitals, it's really changing the way we care for patients at the bedside. We're probably thinking about fewer people at the bedside with different specialties, and we're likely going to have very skilled providers who are providing remote care and supporting this new workforce at the bedside. And so I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the way once we really transition to digital. But again, it will require for us to provide a product that's cheaper, easier, and provides better access.
And Noor, what are your thoughts? And also, which markets across the globe do you think are sort of leading the way in this?
So I think that, you know, to Mary's point, it'll be a lot more at home. I think if we fast forward 5 or 10 years, most of your care will be at home. I think you'll only go to a hospital if it's an emergency or you need a surgery. Similar to now how you do all your banking digitally and you only go to a bank, you know, maybe to close your account or open your account, right? So the idea of going into a branch of a bank is really foreign to most people. And so the idea of going to a clinic for a doctor, unless you need something physically, physical intervention, is going to be much less common. So I think that's part of it. And I think that given where technology has gotten in terms of scanning and remote diagnostics, you know, we'll get there in the next 5 to 10 years. I do not think it'll be next year or the year after. I think we'll see a lot coming out of emerging markets, especially on remote diagnostics. You know, just like we saw M-Pesa, which was based in Kenya, it kind of changed the world of finance. You know, what is the M-Pesa of healthcare? So there will likely be 1 or 2 things that come out of emerging markets where we're like, okay, well, that's just a paradigm shift in the way that people think, because you're solving a much larger problem for more people who need it and a different cost base. It can't be half as expensive. It needs to be 5% as expensive. So I think that's a large part of it. And I think that surgeons will get on board. You know, I think that ultimately in 5 or 10 years, surgeons will have to you know, use robotics, use a lot of AI, use remote proctoring in order to perform surgeries, because data will prove that that provides a much higher level of success and a much lower level of complication.
And I guess also for surgeons and new talent coming up, actually using that technology would just become part of the norm and integral to their training and their experience, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that we think of, that we're thinking about here at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, is really a different type of physician, a virtualist in all of the specialty areas that's expert in providing telehealth or remote care, remote support for care. And then having our bricks and mortar physicians that you need to come in and see when they need hands-on care. And I think we may see something like that evolve as well over the next 5 to 10 years. Because you can't, ultimately, you can't, when you're thinking about running a hospital, you can't afford to have the bricks and mortar doctors also do the telehealth care, unfortunately, especially if it's going to be a lot cheaper. So I think we're going to see this, potentially this emerging new specialty called virtualists, who are really experts in telehealth and remote care.
And I want to go to Kathy now, because I know you've got some thoughts on this from Morgan Stanley. Hi, Kathy, are you there? I need to unmute Kathy. We're going to come back to Kathy in a sec. I'm going to go to Justin Douglas, because I know you've got a question around Oh, Kathy, no, sorry. Hi, you there?
I am, and I apologize. I didn't realize I was on mute. We're talking about technology and all these fun things. And of course, I've been challenged with it today, so I apologize.
No worries.
You guys have had an incredible discussion. It was actually really nice to be a listener as opposed to part of the panelists in a sense, because I really learned a lot from both of the women who are speaking, and really interesting stuff. I know from Morgan Stanley's perspective, we definitely expect trends that have taken hold during COVID-19 to accelerate. So for example, shifts towards like dining at home versus dining out, reduced spending on apparel, and lower usage of transportation. Like those are all areas that we think are going to have some shifts. But we also see upward pressure on spending categories such as food at home, but also what we're talking about today, like our healthcare equity team believes the trend toward more telehealth, and it will also include increased government coverage to help put downward pressure on healthcare costs, which is sort of what you guys were talking about earlier, that everything's so expensive and the costs have to come down. So it'll be interesting to see if that does happen. And I'd say the other piece that think that we think are going to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic is that there is an elevated focus on health and wellness. Again, everything you're talking about. We're already seeing evidence of this, actually. Digital health tools, access is giving, democratizing access to these resources and helping to empower consumers. And I know that, we're thinking maybe we're not going to see some changes for another 5 or 10 years, or that people will go back to, where they were. But we've actually seen 80% year over year downloads of health, fitness, and medical apps. So that's pretty interesting too. So people are interested and, looking for ways to access this. I'd say the last thing that I just wanted to share is that adoption of telehealth solutions is also accelerating. And we do believe we're in the early stages, the early innings of healthcare, and the push into this digital age. But again, what you were speaking about earlier, the proliferation of wearable devices, health apps, health data, and the convergence of artificial intelligence and mobile applications creates an open and viable runway for adoption going forward. So I think, I just want to reiterate from our standpoint, from, advising clients and so forth, we are right in here with you guys. What you're doing is incredible, and we think this is where the future is going.
Thanks, Kathy. And Noor, I'm interested in the sort of user adoption. Do you have the same view that sort of immediately post-pandemic, you think there'll be quite a big swing back, or actually in the Middle East, is the adoption of this technology accelerating faster than perhaps we're seeing in the US?
So I think it's different. I think that in the US and in emerging markets, this technology is being used to substitute. So it substitutes doctors, it substitutes healthcare, it substitutes what is needed. In emerging markets, it's being used to augment. So many people don't have access to a doctor, now they have access. It's not as if this is instead of your doctor. And this is how it was similar to financial inclusion again. in the US and in Europe, digital banks were really like substituting other banks, whereas in emerging markets, they're new. People were not even on the grid, and all of a sudden they had access to a mobile wallet. So it's different. So I think that the adoption is much stickier in emerging markets, and the pendulum will swing much further.
Thank you. We've got time for 2 more questions, and I want to go to Justin. Thank you for all your comments, Justin, in the UK. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me, Juliet?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this has been great. I'm not a medical professional at all, but I do find the whole topic very fascinating, and this has been such a great session, so thank you very, very much. I am actually intrigued because I've been surprised for years that the adoption of this sort of ability to do more remote medical interventions and teleconsultations has not been faster. And I just wonder if that is to do with sort of privacy concerns from both sides, not just the patient, but the doctors themselves seem reluctant to roll some of this stuff out. And also, any thoughts on the age dynamic to this kind of adoption? I'm fascinated, Mary, that you said a lot of people returning back to face-to-face. That's it for me. I'll stop before my internet goes down.
Thank you. Mary?
I'd love to speak to that. I think that at least in the United States, I think that there certainly are privacy issues, but when we're rolling out these telehealth initiatives, outpatient virtual visits, others, I mean, they really are, they're privacy compliant. And so we feel really good about that. I would say the barriers pre-COVID were really payment. We weren't getting paid for telehealth, the work that we were doing in telehealth. And so to really take what is a paying service, and in healthcare we don't really make a lot of money, to take what was a paying service and maybe not even that a really highly remunerated service and not get paid at all, we just couldn't go down that road. And so I think that was the major barrier. When COVID came, they removed those barriers and we were getting paid at parity, and that's what really allowed us to move forward quickly.
Noor, any thoughts on that question from Justin?
So in my perspective, one of the things that we're seeing in emerging markets is the cross-border element. So, for example, Egypt has more doctors per capita than any other country in emerging markets. And so leveraging that and that cost base, which is very different to a cost base, for example, of other markets, and insurance companies are starting to play into that and to really leverage one cost base over another. I think when you take a step back, what needs to happen here for user adoption to remain high and costs to be very beneficial across the board to insurers, to payers, to providers, and to patients is the same thing that happened in other technologies, which is it's a 3-step approach. So when you want to buy something on Amazon, when you want to adopt e-commerce, when you want to do almost anything from a technology perspective, if it takes more than 3 steps, you're unlikely to complete the transaction. And similarly in healthcare, if you want to find a doctor and book a doctor, it should take no more than 3 steps. Mm-hmm. If you want to get access to your medical record, it should take no more than 3 steps. And so until the user interface and the user experience becomes that friendly, you'll always have the pendulum swing back, as Mary put it, if people have an option, but only stay there if it's a supplement and people have no option. So the UI and the UX, as we call them, is very important in the development of any technology sector. And this one's no different.
And have you seen, I think Justin mentioned also the age demographic, have you seen any differences around age or even gender, Mary, for this?
Yeah, well, I would say that the data that I'm closest to and the place where we've seen the most adoption in the United States is in urgent care, or for patients who are just have a cold, those kinds of things that they want to see a provider for. And what we're seeing in the urgent care space, where there's a lot of telehealth, is that it is typically 75% of the people who are accessing that is women who are between 18 and 39. So we see it's a younger population, and in the urgent care space, typically it's women. We're trying to get our arms around what it looks like now in the outpatient virtual visit space, the scheduled virtual visit space, and I think we'll begin to see some more data. Certainly from our own perspective with patients, our elderly population is less willing.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question, and then we need to wrap it up, unfortunately. Rob Colorina, are you there? Hi, Rob.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can.
Great, thank you. I put just a summary question there on the box on the emerging markets, I guess more towards Noor. You know, I've spent a little time on boards in UAE and in Southeast Asia. Is some of your thesis here on the jump from things like landlines into mobile? So the mindset is there's less bureaucracy and there's more sort of the demand is now. So the question is on culture of accepting some of the technology change. I'd be curious on that a bit further from your end, as well as from the Dartmouth side, if you care to input.
Thank you, Rob. Noor?
Juliet, that was again very distant. I'm not sure what's going on with my Zoom. Do you mind just repeating the question?
Yeah, so the question was regards to the emerging markets versus developed markets, and are you seeing more technology sharing in the emerging markets versus more of the developed markets?
So on the adoption and acceptance and kind of cross-border.
Yeah.
I think that what we've seen is largely a factor of our demographic. So 50% of our population's under the age of 30. So with that, you have digital natives who are happy to accept and adopt and don't know any different, perhaps, for a large part of that population, as well as a population that is underserved. So again, you're providing a service that doesn't exist in the first place, rather than just supplementing or substituting something that does. So that's kind of the acceptance is much higher because of the demographic, because of the digital natives, and because you're providing something that people don't have. I think when we take a look more east towards India, it's not as young of a population, but there is also very high adoption, and again, largely because it's an underserved market.
Thank you, Noor, and thanks, Rob, for your question. I hope we answered that. I know we're almost out of time, but I did want to ask you, Mary, and then Noor, what excites you about this next period in the industry, and what makes you hopeful? Mary, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. Yeah. It's of course, again, I think about that a lot, and the one I'm really working for every day is an environment where patients can get care when they want it and when they need it. And so really working for better access for patients and for all patients to get the access they need to the health care that they need, and for it to be easier for them to access. And we really just also need to drive down the cost of healthcare, and I really think that digital health is a way for us to do that. So I kind of always come back to those three, and I think if we can achieve that, faster, better, cheaper, we'll be in good shape. And I really think that this has started us on that journey.
Thank you, Mary. And Noor, what excites you most about this next period in the healthcare tech space?
So I second Mary. I think that access, quality, and cost, and the implication of digital solutions on those three for healthcare are massive and are very exciting. I also really look forward to more personalized medicine. So I think that as data aggregation and independent data for each individual comes into play, we'll have better solutions for people that with higher efficacy on medication and products. And that's more suitable for each person for their own ailments and their own genetic code.
Thank you. We're just out of time. Noor and Mary, thank you so much for such an insightful discussion into the future of healthcare tech. It's such a rich and such an important topic that I think could help improve the lives of so many people. And I also just wanted to say thank you to Kathy Entwistle at Morgan Stanley for being our partner for this series. And most importantly, thank you all for joining and for the brilliant questions. We hope you enjoyed it. Please do share any feedback with us. We'd love to hear your comments and any other topics you'd like us to cover in our future series. You can email us at community@worth.com. Next week at Worth Live, tune in on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time for the next installment of the Lonely CEO series, where we'll be discussing the challenges and opportunities of leading remotely and the power of partnerships with special guest Wendy Kai Lee, CEO and President of Piermont Bank, Kirsty Wallace, CEO of Elevate Network, and Bertha Gonzalez Nieves, who is the co-founder and CEO of Casa Dragones, the tequila brand. And that will be moderated by Kate Luzio, the founder and CEO of Luminary. And then on Thursday, we're back at the normal time for the next normal series at 4 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be speaking with Commissioner Kathy Engelbert from the WNBA on how basketball is vying for equality and how 2020 has affected women in sports. And Kathy will be joining us for that as well. Thank you, everyone. Please register online at worth.com/events for those events next week and for all of our other future events. Please sign up for our newsletters as well. In the meantime, stay healthy, be kind, safe, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you again, speakers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.